His car was still running when neighbors found it, headlights cutting through the fog like someone had stepped out for just a moment and planned to return. But the driver's seat was empty, the door slightly open, and the engine humming like a heartbeat refusing to die. The man who owned the car, Daniel Royce, had vanished into the cold night without leaving a single footprint, as if the darkness itself had swallowed him whole. And what made this case even stranger was the phone left on the dashboard, recording a voice message that ended abruptly with a whisper one investigators still can't explain. This is the story of Daniel's final night, and the truth detectives uncovered when they realized he never intended to leave that car, but something or someone forced him to. The engine hummed softly under the cold pre-dawn air, sending white vapor drifting from the exhaust as though the car itself was breathing. The headlights cut through the fog, illuminating an empty stretch of road where no one should have been at for 12 a.m. Officer Daniel Reyes slowed his patrol vehicle, squinting at the strange sight ahead as the unsettling familiarity of abandoned car calls crept over his nerves. The car was parked perfectly straight, as if the driver had stepped out for just a moment and planned to return any second. But the driver's door was wide open, swinging gently with every cold gust sweeping across the asphalt. A half-empty coffee cup sat in the cup-holder, still steaming as though it had been freshly poured. Reyes stepped closer, shining his flashlight inside to find a phone on the passenger seat, unlocked on a paused navigation app showing a route that simply ended abruptly and without explanation. The eerie calm of the forested roadside made the scene feel staged, like someone had taken care to leave everything untouched and quietly walked into the darkness. He called out into the trees, his voice muted by the heavy fog that swallowed sound almost instantly. Only the faint drip of condensation from the branches answered him. The registration came back to Ethan Cole, a 29-year-old software engineer with no criminal record, no history of mental health issues, and no reason to vanish on a quiet weekday morning. Reyes felt a cold twinge in his chest cases that started this neatly never ended neatly. He noticed faint scuff marks near the driver's door, barely visible patterns pressed into the wet ground. They weren't footprints, more like dragged impressions. As if something or someone had been pulled, the radio crackled as dispatch relayed that Ethan's girlfriend had reported him missing an hour earlier, saying he never came home from his shift, her voice shaky and strained. Pressured Reyes to move faster. Backup arrived, their headlights adding harsh angles of light across the scene as officers fanned out into the woods. The forest looked undisturbed, but the silence felt wrong, like it was holding a secret. A sudden metallic clatter echoed from deeper inside, pulling every flashlight beam toward the sound. Reyes raised his hand for silence, listening as the noise faded into the same unnatural stillness as before. The car's dash cam blinked red, still recording. Reyes leaned in and pressed play, hoping for a thread he could pull. At first, the video showed Ethan driving calmly, music low, fingers tapping the steering wheel. Then, at 3:58 a.m., he turned to look at something outside the passenger window, his eyes widening as if he recognized whatever he saw. He whispered one word that the mic barely captured, "No." The camera shook violently as the car swerved, the view jerking toward the trees. Ethan's breathing grew loud and erratic, followed by a sudden slam, then static. The final frame showed nothing but darkness, but the car engine remained running in the present moment, as if someone had stepped out mid-terror. Reyes swallowed hard, staring into the forest as the early morning air tightened around him. He didn't know it yet, but the moment he pressed play, he stepped into Ethan's last known minutes. A low beeping sound suddenly emanated from Ethan's phone, vibrating against the passenger seat. Reyes picked it up, noticing a new message had appeared just seconds before, sent from an unknown number. It read only, "Stop looking." Reyes felt the world tip into a deeper, darker place than he'd prepared for. And Ethan Cole's disappearance was no longer just a missing person call. It was the beginning of something much worse. The search team expanded at sunrise, their boots sinking into the damp earth as fog lifted slowly off the lake. No one wanted to say it, but everyone feared what normally followed abandoned cars in the middle of nowhere. A detective named Harris replayed the dashcam footage from the car again, leaning closer with narrowed eyes. Something flickered in the reflection of the windshield, a shadow moving behind the trees just seconds before the engine was found running. He paused the video and enhanced the image, but the shape was too distorted to identify. Still, the movement convinced him that the man didn't walk away on his own. Meanwhile, the missing man's sister, Emily, stood near the search command tent, clutching her brother's jacket against her chest. Her voice trembled as she repeated to the officers he wouldn't leave his car, he wouldn't. A park ranger approached with new information, saying hikers had reported strange noises the night the man vanished. They described it as someone calling for help echoing from deep inside the forest. The officers split into teams and followed the trail that cut through the old woodland, scanning for footprints. Their radios crackled softly as if the forest swallowed sound before it could fully form. Half an hour into the walk, they found a boot print matching the missing man's size, pressed deeply into the soft ground. But right beside it was another print, larger, heavier, and pointed in the opposite direction. Detective Harris crouched and touched the soil, feeling how fresh the impressions were. Whoever had been with him wasn't running, they were leading him somewhere. The farther they walked, the more unnatural the forest felt, with silence so thick it pressed against their ears. Even the wind seemed to avoid passing through the trees. Emily, refusing to stay behind, followed closely with another officer. Her breath shuddered as she whispered, "Please let him be alive, please." They reached an abandoned fire tower at the edge of a ravine, its metal frame groaning in the morning breeze. The ladder was rusted, but fresh scrape marks suggested someone had climbed it recently. Harris gestured for two officers to ascend while the rest formed a perimeter. As the team climbed, a strange smell drifted down, metallic, cold, unsettling. At the top, the officers froze, eyes widening at what they saw. A torn piece of the missing man's shirt was caught on a bolt, fluttering like a pitiful flag. Beneath it was something written directly onto the wood with charcoal, short, hurried words, "Don't follow him." Harris stared at the message as the air thickened around him. Someone was warning them, but too late or just in time, he couldn't tell. Then one of the radios crackled unexpectedly with a whisper that made every hair stand. It was the missing man's voice saying, "Stop looking, it sees you." Static swallowed the signal immediately, leaving a suffocating silence. Emily fell to her knees, covering her mouth to keep from screaming, and somewhere deep in the trees behind them, branches snapped as if something massive had shifted its weight. The search was no longer just a rescue, it was a race against something they didn't understand. And the forest felt far more alive now, as if watching them. The search team retreated from the tower, forming tighter groups as tension climbed like smoke through the trees. Harris ordered radio silence, convinced the voice they heard wasn't a glitch, it was a warning. Emily walked between two officers, jumping at every sound. She kept whispering her brother's name into the forest as if afraid to speak too loudly. They discovered a narrow trail leading away from the tower, partially concealed by fallen branches. Someone had intentionally covered it, but not well enough. As they followed it, they noticed deep grooves carved into the nearby trees, like claw marks or desperate attempts to leave signs behind. Each mark pointed in the same direction, downhill. Halfway down the path, they found another clue, a backpack lying in the leaves, partially unzipped. Inside was the missing man's wallet, flashlight, and a small recorder with dried mud on it. Harris pressed play and listened as a shaky voice filled the speaker, the missing man's last words. "If someone finds this, I wasn't alone. He followed me. Don't trust." The recording cut off with a harsh, guttural sound. Emily choked back tears, clutching the backpack to her chest as the officers exchanged uneasy glances. Suddenly, a scream echoed from deeper in the woods, a voice none of them recognized, raw and animalistic. Birds shot out of the trees in a frantic swarm. The officers raised their flashlights despite the daylight, the beams trembling in their hands. Harris whispered, "Stay close, don't run." They pushed forward until they reached an old drainage tunnel emerging from the hillside. Its concrete walls were cracked and covered with moss. Inside, faint dragging marks lined the floor as if something heavy had been pulled through. The air was thick, musty, and unnaturally cold. Emily stepped forward, but Harris quickly blocked her path. "If he went in there," he said quietly, "we need to be prepared for what's inside." They secured ropes and light sticks before entering the tunnel cautiously. Their footsteps echoed like whispers bouncing in every direction. A few meters in, they discovered a jacket drenched in mud, the same jacket the missing man had worn in the security footage the day before. Emily's breath broke as she reached for it. The officer ahead raised his hand, signaling them to stop. Something glinted on the tunnel wall, a message written in shaky black marker, "IT copies voices." Before they could react, a voice echoed faintly from deeper inside. "Emily, Emily, help me." Emily lunged forward, but Harris caught her just in time, shaking his head. The voice repeated, but the tone was wrong, stretched, too slow. The flashlight beams flickered as a cold wind rushed through the tunnel. Then another sound echoed, the unmistakable clicking of something walking on concrete. The officers stepped back, hearts pounding, as a distorted silhouette appeared at the far end. It moved with jerky, unnatural motions. Harris shouted for everyone to retreat immediately. They backed out fast, dragging Emily with them as the shadow drew closer. Once out in the open, they blocked the entrance with fallen branches and boulders, sealing whatever was inside. Emily sobbed into her hands, shaking uncontrollably. Harris stared at the tunnel, chest heaving, mind racing. Whoever or whatever had been inside with the missing man might now be following them. And the forest was growing darker, even though the sun was still overhead. The search team moved into the forest's deepest trail, finding broken branches that looked freshly snapped. A deputy kneeled down, noticing faint footprints heading toward the riverbed. A piece of fabric clung to a thorny bush, fluttering weakly as if placed there moments earlier. One of the officers recognized the print. It matched the shirt he was wearing the day he vanished. The river roared louder as they followed the tracks. Now dissolving halfway into the mud, the rest looked dragged, as if someone or something had been pulling him. A detective lifted a flashlight toward the steep drop, where the land suddenly caved downward. The beam caught skid marks on the edge, telling a silent story of a struggle. The team descended cautiously, ropes digging into their palms as the wind howled like a warning. Near the bottom, they found claw marks on the rocks, too deep for human nails. A deputy whispered that maybe he slipped, but the detective shook her head. The marks were uneven, struggling marks, like he fought to climb back up. A cell phone lay half submerged near the water, its screen cracked, but still blinking faint notifications. A single recorded audio file waited in the galley. Its timestamp was after he disappeared. They played it, and a garbled breath filled the speaker, followed by hurried footsteps crunching through leaves. Then came his shaking voice saying, "Someone's behind me. It's following." The officers exchanged uneasy looks as a second voice crackled through, low and almost distorted. No one could tell if it was human or something else entirely. The recording ended with a splash and a short, gasping cry. Then silence, only the river in the background before it abruptly cut off. The detective pocketed the phone, her jaw tense as she scanned the darkening woods. She radioed for backup, but static replied like the forest was swallowing the signal. They crossed the river, boots sinking into the shallow bank. Another trail of footprints emerged, smaller and lighter than his. The detective crouched, tracing them with the beam of her light. The prints stopped abruptly, as if the person who made them simply vanished mid-step. A metallic smell drifted through the air, thick and unsettling. The team followed it to a hollowed-out section of trees where the ground looked disturbed. They dug carefully, hearts racing with every shovelful of soil. Beneath the dirt, they found a torn backpack, his but stuffed with someone else's belongings. The items inside didn't make sense: baby shoes, a rusted key, a photograph of a house nobody recognized. On the back of the photo, shaking handwriting read, "This is where he went." The detective turned around quickly, sensing movement beyond the tree line. A faint silhouette stood watching them still, unmoving, almost blending into the shadows. When she raised her flashlight, the figure bolted silently between the trees, too fast to be normal. The team ran after it, branches whipping their faces as they chased the phantom-like shape. The woods grew thicker, the air colder, as though they were stepping into a forgotten world untouched by sunlight. The figure slipped through the brush and vanished again, leaving only the echo of hurried breathing. The detective stopped, realizing the direction it ran was toward an old, abandoned farmhouse marked condemned years ago. She felt a chill as she realized it was the same house from the photograph. They approached with caution, the porch boards creaking under their feet as if warning them away. The front door hung open, swaying gently, though there was no wind. Inside, dust covered everything except a fresh trail of muddy prints leading toward the basement. The detective drew her flashlight and started descending the steps. A soft tapping echoed from below, slow and deliberate, like someone signaling from the darkness. Then they heard a voice, barely whispering, "Help, I'm still here." They rushed forward, swinging the flashlight across the cold stone room. In the far corner, chained to an old heating pipe, was a man, but not the one they were looking for. His eyes were wide with terror as he whispered, "Run, he's coming back." And at that moment, footsteps creaked above them, heavy and deliberate, blocking the only exit. As the final hours of the investigation unfolded, the town felt heavier than it had in years, as if every street lamp flickered with the weight of unanswered questions. Daniel's car, still running, still humming softly in that lonely pull-off beside the forest, had become a symbol of everything no one could explain. Detectives had searched through every frame of security footage, every inch of the woods, every person who might have held a grudge, but nothing aligned with logic. It was as if Daniel had stepped out of the world in the middle of an unfinished breath. When his sister, Emma, returned to the scene one last time, she stood beside the car in silence, the cold wind brushing against her hair. She placed her hand on the hood. It was warm, almost eerily warm, like the last lingering trace of someone who should have been there. She whispered his name, not expecting him to answer, but hoping the universe might bend, even for a second. The detectives eventually discovered a final clue, a voicemail Daniel recorded only 30 minutes before he disappeared. His voice sounded calm, almost too calm, but there was something strange, an edge in his breathing, a moment where he seemed to turn and look at something before the message abruptly cut off. No one could determine what he saw. No one could decide whether it was something human or something far beyond it. As the months passed, the case remained open, but with no new leads. People in town still talked about the car left running on the roadside, the mysterious voicemail, and the night Daniel vanished without leaving a single footprint behind. Some believed he ran from something. Others believed he was taken. But Emma held on to one belief only: whatever happened, Daniel didn't walk away willingly. In her heart, she knew the truth was still out there waiting, watching, hiding in the silence between the trees. And until the day the case broke open, she would keep pushing, keep asking, keep searching, because stories like Daniel's didn't just fade away, they echoed. And now you've heard the story to one more voice added to the people who refuse to forget him. If you want more stories like this, true crime-inspired mysteries, emotional narrations, and cases that stay with you long after they end, make sure to subscribe, like the video, and turn on the bell icon so you never miss the next upload. Your support helps keep these stories alive and helps bring more unexplained cases into the light.